Here's something else to think about this incident in Minnesota. This poor woman who's dead now and her kids are left motherless. I'm Jeff Newton, former 60 Minutes correspondent, former senior producer at Vice on HBO, and senior producer at National Geographic Television. I usually do these blogs from this place we call the Writer's Cabin, so from the Writer's Cabin, but really from the creek today. Here's what I want you to think about. It's just a little personal experience that when I watch that video makes me cringe. I spent a lot of my time in war zones around the world where there's checkpoints set up and U.S. military personnel are having to man those checkpoints. I remember one time I was outside of Kandahar. I went on a mission with the U.S. Special Forces. This Green Beret A team we were with, along with some Afghan special operations guys. We flew in on helicopters and went into this city. Oh, it's a small town, really, a couple hundred people, to try to go after this one target they had. And they didn't find who they wanted. But to go into that town and search it with such a small team, they need to close off the perimeter, both ends of the town, right? So on the one end, they have security set up, and the other end, they have another security set up. And I was in the town when a really bad incident took place. So, and it's out there. It's on a 60 Minutes piece that we did many years ago. And with me was another producer of mine, friend of mine that worked with me. And he was with the security guy at the road, the special operations guy at the end of the road. And that security guy was by himself. And coming towards them from not too far away was a Hilux, Toyota Hilux, armed with, not armed, but had a bunch of guys in the front and the back seats and in the back of the pickup truck. And then behind that was, off in the distance, was a motorcycle. And those are actual pretty serious threats, because you can have a bunch of what they call fighting age males jumping out of a vehicle with AKs and blowing you away. And if you're one guy by yourself, it's a pretty scary situation. My cameraman was with me, and this guy, his name was Brent. He was a really great guy, really great special operations guy, just the kindest person you'll ever meet. And he was forced to make a decision that day. And he put a couple rounds into the ground as warning shots with his M4. My producer buddy was with me, named Richard Butler, was with him when the whole incident happened, and he was recording this. So he puts the rounds into the ground, and I think it was the third round he fired, which was also a warning shot. Went into the ground, but the vehicle stopped. So he ran up there with his gun, telling them all to get out of the vehicle and all this kind of stuff. So he had done his job. He had stopped this potential threat from coming up at them and potentially endangering, a whole unit of guys going through the village who didn't know that they were there. What they discovered when they got there was that one of those rounds that he fired in the ground, and clearly you can see on camera, his weapon is pointing down into the ground, because we filmed the whole thing. So it came up and ricocheted up and went through the windshield. It didn't hit anybody in the front of the cab, but went through the cab and hit these kids that were, sort of 15, 16 years old that were in the back. Now, there were no weapons and they weren't Taliban. It turns out it was really a friendly fire incident. These guys had no idea, what to do when they were being shot at. You couldn't even necessarily hear they were being shot at because of the engine of the Toyota. But, protocol says you fire warning shots, and hopefully they stop. Because they're like, there's car bombs, right? So you can come up and these guys can jump out and bomb you with car bombs they remotely detonate, or they can jump out and shoot all your people up before you even know what happened. So he was doing his job, and he hit this kid, and I think one of the rounds went through his scrotum and out the back of his backside, really badly injured. If I remember, there was two kids that were injured, but this one kid was injured really badly. And the first thing that he did, this is an American soldier, right? He runs to the back, and he runs past once he realized there was no weapons in the Toyota, he ran past the Toyota and tried to also stop that motorcycle, because that motorcycle is a threat. In fact, I've had one of my guys in Afghanistan that was actually shot by guys on motorcycles driving by when their truck broke down. So it's a real threat, and you're scared when you see motorcycles when you're in Afghanistan. You're remotely out there by yourself. And this guy had the same idea in mind. Taliban ride motorcycles. Usually they'll do two to a bike, one guy on the front and one guy on the bike that will have an AK, and as they go by, they'll just waste people. So he told that threat to stop. And that threat actually did stop. And he didn't have to shoot him or shoot rounds at him or anything. And they just stayed where they're at. And as he was doing this, my buddy, Richard Butler, sort of famous journalist in his own right, turned around and said, "Hey, Brent." And because Richard had seen something that Brent had not. He'd seen this kid injured in the back, bleeding and yelling. And Brent's face went from like combat mode to, oh my God, I've hurt somebody mode, right? That's the reaction you have, right? When you have compassion, when you have empathy. You know, he knew he had done something he didn't want to do. We interviewed him days later. I mean, he took a lot of heat for this, right? We interviewed him. In fact, he took a lot of heat for this. But everybody knew he'd made the right decision. But when you shoot somebody, it's still, it's bad. And they had to make sure, you know, that what he had done was for the right reasons. And they went through all that, and they did. And we sat down and interviewed him. And you know the thing that sticks out in my brain the most? As he said, "Man, I didn't come here to kill these people. You know, I didn't come here to kill innocent people. And I really regret, you know, what happened to these kids." You know, he said that. You know, he wasn't like this ice guy with running by and acting all tough and puffing his chest out and covering his face. He sat there right in front of the camera and said, "I didn't mean to come here, you know, and kill innocent people." And instead, what we have today is, you know, Trump attacking this woman and Kristi Noem circling the wagons. FBI Director Kash Patel saying he won't be involved in a joint investigation with those law enforcement officers in Minnesota. Why not? Why don't you want to see what went wrong? Why don't you want to learn from it? In the military, they call them after-action reviews. Something happens, somebody gets killed, somebody gets shot. Every mission, after-action review. Why aren't they after-action reviewing this? And why isn't this guy, you know, put under investigation for that? Because clearly he didn't need to do that. I've been around so many military operations where the threat was so much higher, and the stakes were so much higher. Guys wearing vests that could explode on you, right? But you can't treat every civilian like he's wearing an explosive vest. And I look at these guys who are doing the shit, these ICE guys, and it just screams, I'm not trained. I'm not trained. And some of them, they're just, even if they're former military, you know, I don't know what the composition of all these ICE guys are. I think a lot of them are just guys who spend a lot of time on the range and were waiting for the phone call to come so they could come and be a part of this fascist regime, honestly. But maybe there's a lot of military guys too. Certainly a lot of them move like that. But I just remember it all came down, you know, from the leadership of the U.S. military in Afghanistan. Most of these generals were pretty hardcore, you know, Stan McChrystal, and he took a lot of heat from the Biden administration, but he was a good guy. You know, you had Dan McNeil, who used to be commander of the 82nd Airborne. I was spending a lot of time with him, traveling around the country. It came down like you got to be very careful how you treat these people, this local population. And that was in Afghanistan. They got more respect in Afghanistan than they get in the streets of America. So that's a leadership thing. Nobody's telling them, hey, try not to shoot the civilians. They're saying, we're going to move these punks out of here, you know, both protesters with their bullhorns, and quit. Hey, ICE, I have a message for you. Quit acting like every person who's going through near your checkpoints where you're doing official work, rounding up little brown people. Quit acting like they're all wearing a fucking explosive vest like you did in this incident. Quit acting like they're all carrying AKs in their car when you look in the car and it's a 37-year-old woman. What do you think they are? What do you think they're doing? Complain all you want about you think she shouldn't have run away and all that kind of stuff. You know, if you're a well-trained police officer, you might have stepped aside, not pulled your weapon, taken her license plate, and gone later to her home and filed charges against her for evading arrest or, you know, or disorderly conduct or resisting arrest or interfering with an investigation. All that stuff you could have charged her with later. But guess what? She wouldn't be dead and her kids wouldn't be orphaned. Think about that shit. You're killing Americans. Like, follow, and share.